What's good, everyone? OJ here. Welcome back to another video. Today we're taking a look at the PlayStation 5 reviews of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, as it has started out at a historic pace for Final Fantasy and something that we have not seen for a mainline console-based Final Fantasy game since the PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 days, with Final Fantasy X and Final Fantasy 9 and Final Fantasy 12 in those games, and that is a 90+ average ranking. Yes, it's been decades since we've seen that. Now, we've had Final Fantasy 14 and some other games that have came in when it comes to the MMO or maybe even spin-offs, but for a mainline home console Final Fantasy, the 93 average right now, sitting at over 100+ reviews, is the best that we've seen for Final Fantasy in a very long time. So in this video, I'm going to break down all of the top scores, middle scores, and lowest scores, and give you guys an idea of what makes Final Fantasy VII Rebirth tick. The positives, negatives, and not so good overall, or meh when it comes down to it. Now, before we get into that though, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're someone new, and click that notification bell to get my videos first. Now let's go ahead and jump right into it. We're starting off with a 10 out of 10 from Attack of the Fanboy, and they stated that Final Fantasy VII Remake invokes all kinds of emotions in me, made me see my low poly childhood friends as real people, and allowed me to once again be a part of a grandiose, fate-challenging, God-defying adventure that I haven't experienced since the PS1 days. So there you go, the PlayStation 1 once again. Next up is from Games Hub, a 10 out of 10, and they stated that it makes you feel, it makes you think, with grand set pieces and rich narrative turning points. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth consistently gives you reasons to care, to sit at the edge of your seat, wide-eyed, wondering what the future holds. Even with the groundwork laid by the original game, there is a sense that anything can happen, that the future remains unwritten. That's one of the themes when it comes to Final Fantasy, of what is controlled and what isn't, and what's going to happen and what's not, especially with characters like Zack coming back into the fray here. Now, next up is a 10 out of 10 from Hey Poor Player. They stated that it's not often we see a Game of the Year contender so early in the year, which is not necessarily true. We get Game of the Year contenders at the beginning of the year, but either way, but here we are. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is an unforgettable follow-up to one of the finest remakes ever produced, deftly building upon the rock-solid foundation of its predecessor. It evolves the combat and progression systems in subtle yet exciting ways, while setting you loose in a massive world that you'll want to explore to its fullest, with countless activities to keep you busy and a gripping story that will leave both Final Fantasy VII veterans and newcomers alike on the edge of their seats. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a unmissable adventure. I agree, and there are a lot of 10 out of 10s here, guys. We're not going to go over everything, but I will hit a couple more of them before we move to the 9s, and then the best thing about this, no negative reviews, no mixed reviews, so everything is above a 75, and actually there's nothing as of right now below an 8 out of 10. What an incredible aggregate of scores here so far. All right, Noisy Pixel, 10 out of 10, and they said this: Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is an exceptional sequel that surpasses expectations in nearly every aspect. It combines compelling storytelling, innovative combat, and a wealth of engaging content to deliver an unforgettable adventure as a bold continuation of the saga. It sets the stage for the final installment, leaving fans eagerly awaiting what comes next. Square Enix has truly outdone itself, showcasing the depth and potential of the Final Fantasy VII universe. All right, good stuff there. Next up, 10 out of 10 from Siliconera, and they stated, calling a title the best game of 2024 may come across as rather short-sighted when done so in February. I don't care. I'm going to say it. I believe Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is the best game we are going to see in 2024, and it also gives me faith in the future of the series. I mean, if you're making a prediction, that's okay, based off of what you've seen before. Yes, it could be short-sighted because we don't know all the games that are coming, but it's a prediction, and this is a really good review score as well. So, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that in my opinion, but just like any prediction, could be right or could be wrong, but I have no issue with that. Now, next up is Twinfinite. They gave it a 10 out of 10 and stated that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is, for all intents and purposes, a phenomenal second act in the remake series. Though its open world design isn't perfect, the game is finally honed in every other area and provides a luxurious of an experience as Final Fantasy VII Remake did. All right, good stuff. Next up is from VGC, 10 out of 10. Andy Robinson over there. Those guys do a great job. Final Fantasy VII is an excellent RPG with some of the best characters in the gaming canon. While some open world content skirts the edges and the game's main narrative is left somewhat deflated, the time spent with Aerith, Tifa, and the game makes this a hugely enjoyable road trip you'll be playing for hundreds of hours. A lot of content in there, guys. All right, next up, we're going to go over one more 10 out of 10, and that is from God is a Geek. And they stated that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a phenomenally good video game. It has a habit for self-indulgence, but earns every pause with some shocking story moments and some of the best combat I've experienced. And there's a lot more 10 out of 10s there, guys. RPG Gamer, Gaming Bolt, IGN Spain, CG Magazine, Gaming Age, all gave it 10 out of 10s as well. But let's move into some of the 9 out of 10s from the sites out there. So next up is from Worth Playing, 9.8 out of 10. And they stated that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth knocks it out of the park. It takes the already excellent first game and expands it to bigger and more populated world. The combat has been improved. The dungeon design is better. The story hits a lot more with its misses. And from start to finish, it's pretty much everything I could have wanted. Only a few nagging problems keep it from perfection, and it's a love letter to everything that makes Final Fantasy VII great. Awesome to see there. Next up, COG Connected, 9.5 out of 10, and said this. This Final Fantasy VII project is a massive undertaking of an impossible scale. A single release stretched into 3 games, preposterous, and yet, so far the team has totally nailing it. The first game was a smash hit, and Rebirth runs laps around it in almost every way. The performances, the plot, and the gameplay are all much improved, with a couple notable exceptions. While I hated 1 or 2 sections with venomous passion, there aren't enough to spoil their experience. They aren't enough to spoil the experience. The game is less than perfect, but not by much. If you've been hotly anticipating this release, you were right to do so. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a fantastic follow-up to a pretty incredible game. Awesome to see there as well. Let's get into MMORPG.com with a 9.5 out of 10, saying Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a modern RPG masterpiece and solidly sets up its 3rd installment in the Final Fantasy VII Remake project. It's ambitious and massive in scope, and that's before we even get to the daunting task of recreating one of the most iconic stories of all time. At its core, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth retains the essence of what the original story contained, expanding on it meaningfully in a way that feels wholly new, and I can't wait to see how it all concludes. All right, there you go. We're almost done here. It almost seemed crazy when we first got into the whole FF7 remake a number of years ago and how long that game took to come out, and now it's actually moving, and we have one more in this FF7 remake saga, so good stuff there. All right, next up is from Easy Allies, 9.5 out of 10. As big of an impact as Remake made upon its release, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth eclipses it in nearly every way. It improves upon just about every facet of its predecessor by introducing incredible new mechanics, an unbelievable world to explore, countless charming mini-games, another out-of-this-world soundtrack, some of the most memorable characters, and a fascinating storyline that will leave you on the edge of your seat. This is truly a must-play game for anyone who loves RPGs, and that's why we're talking about it here. This is a must-play for RPG fans like myself and many of you guys that are probably watching this video. All right, next up, 9.5 from DualShockers, and they stated that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth masterfully continues the story of Remake, acting as both a remake and a sequel to the original. Rebirth carves its own identity by deepening and expanding one of the most beloved stories in gaming. Its move towards the open world format is expertly done and creates a near perfect experience for both fans, old and new alike. All right, good stuff there, guys. A lot more 9s out of 10s. Hobby Consolas, Mary Station, RPG Fan, 4Player, M PlayStation, Player 2, Video Chums. They all gave it varying 9s, 9.2, 9.3, 9.4, all of that. So tons of 9s, actually so much of the scores. In order to get a 90 plus rating, you have to have a lot of 10s and a lot of 9s. So it's good to see that there are so many good scores. Now I do want to read one more from RPG Site, one of my favorite websites out there. And they gave the game a 9 out of 10 and said this: nitpicks and minor annoyances aside, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a grand expansion of the sense of possibility birthed by Final Fantasy VII Remake. Not only does it builds on the earlier promise of Remake as a narrative grappling with Final Fantasy VII's greater impact, but as a game in its singular, lovingly crafted synthesis of design philosophies, both past and present, augmenting modern scale with a deep and long-lived appreciation for its characters. And that's the one thing that you see quite a bit, the characters, Tifa, Aerith, Barrett, all of the guys, Cloud. It just seems like the characters shine with the voice acting and with the setups and the animations and the combat. So I love that the characters are at the forefront and the story is at the forefront and the combat, everything's been expanded, building upon what you have to create something even greater. All right, let's get into the 8 out of 10 scores, guys. We're going to start off with Game Informer with an 8.5 out of 10, saying the sequel went wide, and while that comes with benefits like new ways to explore this beloved world and its various sites, it also comes with drawbacks. They aren't unlike anything fans of the genre have experienced before, and playing as cherished characters certainly eases the pain, but the tedium and blow of the open world checklist can sometimes get in the way of where Rebirth truly shines. The best of remakes exists in Rebirth, but the various open world areas surrounding it, the parts that make Rebirth unique from its predecessor, sometimes miss the mark, which that is actually somewhat of a common theme that you will see in some of these lower scores, is that while there's some incredible things in the game, some of the open world elements and the blow of the tedium of going through in the open world areas is not necessarily great. Now, some people love it though, so it is going to be subjective based on what you like or dislike about open world games. All right, next up is going to be from PC Invasion. They gave it an 8.5 out of 10, saying Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a spectacular adventure with best-in-class combat and visuals that remind you why this world is so beloved to begin with. Rebirth's greatest strengths is not how it reimagines the original game for a modern audience, but rather how it inspires a modern audience to appreciate the original game. Very spiffy writing there, I like it. Next up, GameSpot, 8 out of 10 here, and they stated that thankfully, what Final Fantasy Rebirth succeeds at eclipses what it fumbles. It's a superbly designed gameplay experience that instills a sense of freedom while also making exploration rewarding in a meaningful way. Refined gameplay that makes character synergy a focal point breathes new life into the slick and satisfying combat, and all the while it reinforces the underlying themes of the story. As a game that has the inevitable task of living up to one of the strongest legacies in the medium, it's a worthy second chapter. Whether Square Enix can bring it all together in the third and final part will be the subject of much discussion from here on out. Just like at Destiny's Crossroads, an unknown future beckons once again, and anything is possible, which the overlying theme of FF7 and the weight of the world trying to surpass what has happened is actually a really cool kind of like meta type of thought process or meta type of understanding within the game itself. So I love that. I love that aspect that they kind of intertwined into the game. Next up, VG247, 8 out of 10, and stated, flaws be damned, scores be damned, through in my heart, this will inevitably end up being one of my favorite games of 2024. Its vibes are simply irresistible. So issues, but still incredible. They love Final Fantasy, and I love Final Fantasy too, so it's awesome to see that. Next up is from Hardcore Gamer, 8 out of 10, and they stated, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a big step in the right direction that's unfortunately held back by graphical anomalies and open world tropes. It's an emotional roller coaster ride that's heavily backloaded. It's pull on your heartstrings and make you invested in each character more than ever before. It helps all that the memorable moments from the original are not only retained, but strengthened thanks to the graphical prowess of the PlayStation 5. Combat also remains highly engaging, with slight modifications that only enhance the experience further. Unfortunately, Rebirth is also marred with baffling design choices that stifle its greatness. It's filled with mini-games that thankfully are mostly in side quests, as their controls and functions leave much to desire. At the very least, they will keep you interested as it never gets stale. On top of that, while most of the graphics will have you impressed, low resolution textures and geometry are spliced in the most confusing of ways, only pulling you out of the immersion. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth has its share of issues that prevent it from greatness, but whether you're a hard fan or relatively new to the saga, this remains an RPG for the ages. So one of the things about this is that I played it in my own testing of the demo, and they did have like a second demo that helped out with the performance mode. There are two modes in the game. You have a graphical mode, which is going to get you like 4K or checkerboard or 4K or higher resolutions. Then you have performance mode, which looks like 1080p or so, and then maybe even dynamic resolution. So yeah, it looks looks like those issues did kind of creep into the game. They didn't fix it completely with the performance mode, but considering the scope and scale of the game, it's just going to be subjective based on how annoying it is for you or not. But it is something that people did talk about on Twitter and on social media about the performance mode and how it looks kind of low res at times, especially considering this is on PlayStation 5, right? So just keep that in mind as well if you're playing on performance mode. And if you decide to play on the graphics mode, well, you're going to have much better looking graphics, but half the frame rate, right? 30 frames per second. So there are options there. All right, now we're going to go over the last review here, and it's from The Enemy, and they gave it an 8 out of 10 and said this: Final Fantasy VII Rebirth constantly balances itself between the familiar and the unknown. Sometimes it moves between these two fields in a very defined vision. At other times, it mixes these two sides with a clear intent to confuse and dazzle. Therefore, it's a game that will delight, surprise, and sometimes disappoint you. Sometimes it will do all of these things at the same time. So there are far more 8 out of 10s as well. The Guardian, Shack News, Push Square. There's a ton of 8 out of 10s. So if you want to see the full thing, you can check out Metacritic. My own personal thought process is that I never had a doubt that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was going to be an incredible experience, that they were going to take the base game and build upon it and make something even greater with it. I think that what shines so far from looking through these reviews are the characters, the gameplay, the story, but there's also some pitfalls with that, with the gameplay in the open world for some people, with the story, maybe some of the things in terms of how they tie everything together with the story overall. So there are some really positive things, there are some negative things, but that's what makes it interesting. You get lots of people's different opinions, you look at the positive, negatives, and then you kind of form your own opinion once you play the game as well. So I'm looking forward to playing. I've got my special edition coming in, and I will be streaming, and of course a review when I eventually finish it, because this game is like 100 hours if you do most of the content in the game. So what are your thoughts on Final Fantasy VII Rebirth for the PlayStation 5 and the reviews so far? Let me know what you think in the comment section. All right, guys, that's going to wrap it up for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. Please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're someone new, click that notification bell, and check out my other Nintendo Switch and RPG videos right here on screen. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you guys for the next one. Peace.